Hi, seventh graders. Today we're going to talk about area of circles. So some vocabulary that you're going to need to feel confident with is you need to know what a radius is. Okay, so remember radius is the distance from the center of a circle to any point along the circle on the outside edge of the circle. And so when you think of a radius and you have your circle and it's from the center outward, you can also remember that the radius is going to be half of the diameter. And then the other vocabulary term that we need to be aware of today is what area is. So when we talk about area, we're figuring out that amount of space within an object, and that's going to be measured in square units. So for circles, our area formula is pi times radius squared. And I'm actually going to write that out a second way as well. So pi times r again. Okay, so radius squared is different than multiplying times 2. You're multiplying the radius times itself. Okay, so in order to use this formula, you need to find out what the radius is first. So let's look at a couple of examples. Here I have some circles, all right? So when I look at this first circle on the left, I'm gonna notice that I do have my radius. So we're gonna write out our formula. And so now I can plug in my information. So I'm gonna be looking for my area. I know I'm gonna use 3.14 for pi, and I'm gonna be taking 11 squared. So again, that's not 11 times 2, that's 11 times 11. Which is 121, and then I'll multiply that times pi, and that's going to give me 379.94, and then because this is square units, we're doing the area, this would be square miles. When I look at the next example, again, we need our radius. We need to know the radius, so in this case, I do have the radius. So we're going to do 6 squared, and we're going to end up multiplying that times pi. So 6 squared is 36, and multiply times 3.14. And then we'll get 113 and 4/100 square yards. So let's look at a couple of other examples. When I look at these circles, if I want the area of these, I'm going to write out my formula. And again, we need to know our radius. So the difference here is on these circles, I actually have the diameter. So in this case, 16 centimeters is my diameter. So I need to know what the radius is. So if 16 is my diameter, my radius is half of that. So my radius is 8 centimeters. So now I can plug in 8. And I'm going to do 8 squared, which is 64, and multiply that times 3.14. And we'll get 296/100 or 200.96 square centimeters. On this next one, again, we have our diameter is 20.2 feet. So I need the radius first. So my radius is going to be 10.1 feet. And we'll start with our formula. So pi r squared. And so pi is 3.14. My radius is 10.1. So I need to square 10.1 first. Which gives me 102 and 1/100. And then I'm going to multiply that times pi. And so then I'll get 320.3114 square feet. And again, typically you'll like round to, if I needed to round to the nearest hundredth, the one is in the hundredths place. So then I could round that off to be 320.31 square feet. Or if I wanted the entire answer, I could leave it as is. All right, so now let's start applying that area formula to some other types of shapes. So here, we're going to be looking at our comparison of, we're going to use what we know about the area of a circle to solve for these other ones, okay? So here I have a semicircle. And just like when we did perimeter, okay, a semicircle is half of a circle. So if I wanted to find the area of that shaded region, I'm going to use my formula. We have a diameter of 12 inches. So if I have a diameter of 12 inches, I need my radius first. So the radius is 6. So I'm going to end up doing 3.14 times 6 squared. 6 squared is 36. 3.14 times 36 is going to equal 113 and 4/100. Now, this would be the area for a full circle, but we don't have a full circle. We have a half circle. So we're going to divide that by 2. And we'll get 56.52 square inches. Now, when we did perimeter, we had to add our diameter back on because we were talking about the distance around the outside of the shape. When we're talking about area, I'm talking about just the inside part of the shape. And so I actually don't need to add anything back on. I've already figured out the area of that shape just by dividing the entire area by 2. All right, so when we look at this next example, again, we're going to kind of take into consideration what we see. So right now, you could view this problem a couple of different ways. I see 3/4 of a circle. So first I'm gonna do some math to figure out what the area of a full circle would be. And so again, we're gonna use our area formula. Pi r squared. My radius is 14. So I'm gonna take 3.14 times 14 squared. 14 squared is 196. And multiply that times 3.14. We get 615.44 square inches. Now that would be the entire circle, but I don't have an entire circle. I have 3/4 of a circle. So there's a couple of different ways that you might do. So when we see this circle, I see 3/4 of a circle. That's the way I view it. Some of you might see it as a full circle minus 1/4. Okay. Either way, there's a couple of different ways you could do this. So I know that I have 3/4 of the circle, or I might think 75% of the circle. So essentially, if this is the area of the entire circle, I want 75% of that number. So I can take 0.75 and multiply that by 615.44, and that would allow me to figure out the area of that shaded region. So that's going to be 461.58 square inches. Another way some of you might view this problem, you might divide by this overall area. You could divide that by 4 and figure out what each fourth is, and then use that information to either add that up 3 times or subtract the 1/4 out from the full circle. So again, there's a variety of ways to look at that problem. All right, this last example here, we want to find the area of that shaded region. So I have this rectangle kind of with this missing circle part. So first we're going to figure out the area of the rectangle, and we're going to subtract off the area of the circle. So the area of the rectangle is length times width. So I'm going to be doing 15 times 6. And then I'm going to subtract off pi times radius squared. So 15 times 6 is going to give me 90. And I'm going to be subtracting 3.14. The radius of this circle, Okay, again, the radius is half of the diameter. So the 3 feet is representing the diameter. So the radius is going to be 1.5. And then I'm going to need to square that as well. So I'm going to do 1.5 squared, which gives me 2.25. Multiply that times 3.14. So the area of the circle is 7 65 thousandths. And then now I'm going to subtract off the area of the circle from the rectangle. And so we'll get 82.935 square feet. If I was rounding that to the nearest hundredth, I could say 82.94 square feet. All right, have a wonderful day.